Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Office 365 Developer Pulse, sponsored by Microsoft. My name is Scot Hillier. I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking about next-generation portals for Office 365, and I'm pleased to have as my guest today Principal Architect of Blue Metal, Bob German. Bob, how about joining us?
Hey, thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
You share your webcam there for us?
Sure can. There we
There
go.
he is. Hey, Bob, how are you?
Doing
Good.
great.
Welcome to the show. Hey,
Thanks.
for people who haven't had a chance to meet you, how about giving us a couple of minutes on who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I work for a company called Blue Metal. We're a Microsoft Gold certified partner and all that fun stuff. I actually got started with SharePoint development back in the Site Server 3.0 days. So that definitely dates me. I will say I had no gray in my beard at all at that time, so just might be a
Well,
coincidence. We'll see.
that's probably all caused from working with Site Server.
Yeah, exactly. And it's gotten better and more exciting over time. So, I've taken it through the various SharePoint. I worked for Microsoft for 16 years in their MCS, in the consulting services, as well as in the Microsoft Technology Centers. And with all the changes that are going on in the development world for SharePoint and for Office 365, I think a lot of people are maybe concerned about it, but I think there's a huge amount of opportunity there as well. And that's really what today's discussion is going to be about, right?
Yeah, that's great. And I should also say that Bob and I have known each other for, I don't know, has it been 10 years? Probably 10 years or something
Easily,
like that.
right? Yep.
Now, I used to do training classes at the MTC where you were running the infrastructure, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
So great. So I say, known Bob for a long time. He's a great technologist, great presenter. So I think everybody's in for a treat here. So let's get started. We're going to talk about building next generation portals in Office 365, and maybe you can get us started by explaining to us exactly what is a next generation portal for Office 365.
Sure, absolutely. So, I thought maybe we'd start with that and then get into some new concepts of Office 365 as a platform and then actually talk about how to actually build a next generation portal. So, notice the wording is kind of careful. Like Microsoft calls them next-gen portals, I'm calling it next generation portals because officially we don't have all the bits we need yet to build a true next-gen portal. The first one that came out is the Office 365 video portal. That's out there now. If you haven't tried it, I totally recommend it. It's fully mobile ready. It's kind of like YouTube for the enterprise. It's already in your Office 365 subscription. All you have to do is turn it on. And it's storing the metadata in SharePoint, but using Azure Media Services behind the scenes to manage the videos. It'll transcode them for you automatically. And there's quite an interesting roadmap for this as well. But what's kind of interesting about it from a developer point of view is that they didn't put the user interface into SharePoint. They built a new user interface for this that's integrated with the rest of Office 365, but it's not like your traditional SharePoint application. The next one to kind of come along was Delve, and Delve is kind of interesting because it encompasses the Office graph. And Scott, I know you've talked about this, and you did a talk at IT Dev Connections actually on the Office graph.
Sure.
So yeah, it's a pretty interesting area, right? It's
I think what makes it interesting is if you really understand a little bit about the underlying idea behind a graph.
Mm-hmm.
And what a graph says is that all of the entities, all the business entities that we care about, they all have relationships to each other. And of course, we sort of get that. We all understand that. But what's wonderful about a graph is you can kind of start with any entity in that relationship web and get to any other entity, which makes it very powerful. So Delve is one type of application that uses graph technology, but certainly not the only thing you can do with it.
That's right.
I think it's powerful.
It's very powerful, and Delve is sort of becoming the My Site in some ways, right? They've just added profiles to it, blogs, things like that. And again, we're going to talk a little bit more about the Graph API as well and how that works a little bit later. But just as a starting point, right? It's not the SharePoint API or not the SharePoint UI anymore. It's a whole new thing, and Then finally, there's something called Infopedia, which was announced at Ignite. Hasn't
Right.
come out yet, but little pieces of it are coming out, I think, in Delve already. And I encourage people to go onto Channel 9 and look up the NextGen portal sessions. There was one on Infopedia that's real interesting, and another one on the internals of NextGen portals that will kind of give you a little bit more of an idea of how they're building all these. So, of course, I went to that session, and Scott, you were probably in the same boat. The first thing I thought of was, well, when do I get to play? How do I build my own, right? You can't show me all this cool stuff and not let me be a part of it, right? And the reality is that they haven't provided all the hooks yet to build a next-gen portal, but I just took it as a challenge to try to build one anyway. And it turns out that an awful lot of the tools and APIs that you would need are there, enough that I think we can come pretty close right now and start adding value for our clients and our business in ways that that would have been much harder in the past.
Great.
So, you might ask kind of, well, what makes it a next-gen portal? And I don't know if Microsoft has an official answer to that question, but in reading the blogs and watching their presentations, these are the attributes that came up over and over again when they were defining the next-gen portal. They're intelligent, meaning that they have the Office graph behind them, so they're being smart about with it. There's machine learning in that thing, and they're trying to be smart and intelligent about these. Social, which to me also encompasses collaboration. So they all help people to collaborate better, and they have hooks into the collaboration and social technologies that Microsoft offers. They're all mobile, which is huge, right? Mobile first is something we're seeing a lot of places, not so much from Microsoft until recently. They're all ready to go, and so the idea there is, the client or the customer just flips the switch and off it goes. And it uses Office 365 services like the Office Graph, like OneDrive, Skype, Exchange, email, calendars, SharePoint, Yammer, Azure AD, everything that you can imagine, right? The thing is that I think that they've done a great job of finding some next-gen portals that are useful to pretty much anyone. Like, who couldn't use a YouTube for the enterprise, right? Video's getting more and more pervasive. Just makes sense. But there's also customers who are going to want something that's more tailor-made. Microsoft will always do those horizontal scenarios that apply to a large percent of the market. But they're probably never going to go into real deep industry-specific or client-specific kinds of scenarios. And that's where we get to come in and do our thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of developers have become concerned that the entire Office 365 suite means that we're moving away from creating tailored interfaces and custom applications for people using those services. But it's really not true. It's just the manner in which we're doing it. So customers are always going to want some level of customization in there.
Yeah, no question, and I see it already. I see it all the time. I think you're right, and I think part of the reason is that Microsoft is introducing so much at such a fast pace, and you and I have had this discussion before of just keeping up with all the stuff that they're shipping can be a challenge, right?
Yeah, I'm running on a hamster wheel right now. You can't see it.
Yeah, right, and so the rest of the world is, I think, kind of in the same boat, and they've gotten some of this out to developers, but they haven't really gotten it mainstream. They're just trying to say, hey, this is what the video portal is, this is what Delve is, much less this is what you could do if you tailor-made.
Right.
So we're trying to help them out a little bit, and also help anybody who's able to watch this to realize what's possible. And so I really set out to kind of do the art of the possible with the demo that I'm going to show. But before we go there, I just want to introduce one other concept or discussion maybe, which is the idea of SharePoint as a platform versus Office 365 as a platform. And traditionally SharePoint, and I did this when I had a Microsoft badge, we kind of told people, hey, use SharePoint. It comes with so much out of the box. So use SharePoint as a platform for developing your application. So essentially you would build a line of business application inside of SharePoint, running on SharePoint sites. If you wanted to bring your business data in, you'd use BCS or custom code. You get use of all of SharePoint's document management, search, user profiles, Office web applications, just this huge amount of work that's already done for you. And then SharePoint also provides the web server, a security model, a hosting model, an app model, page rendering, web parts, navigation, branding, publishing pages. It was a pretty compelling story, right?
Well, we certainly built a lot of solutions on that platform.
We did, and now there's like a little bit of a controversy, right? Because I wrote a blog article on SharePoint as a service, and then Andrew Connell wrote a similar article, and he got quite a conversation going from his article.
Right.
And I guess people tend to go to the extremes. I don't think Andrew meant it as an extreme, like you just shouldn't do SharePoint as a platform anymore.
Right.
But the other, I think there's a time and a place for that, but the other option is to just use SharePoint for all of its services, because kind of what's happened since 2007, when this was the big thing, is first of all, Microsoft has come out with a huge and rich set of client-side APIs, so we don't have to be on the SharePoint server to get at all those good things. And second thing that they've done is kind of the rest of the industry kept moving. So SharePoint's security model now feels like it can be a burden. Anybody, I've been asking this in public forums where people can put up their hands, how many people love alternate access mappings in the zone system in SharePoint? Right? I've got not a single taker yet on that, right? The page model, it can be burdensome. It's not really responsive. There's whole books. Thank you, Eric Overfield, for figuring out how to do this on the SharePoint UI, make it responsive. But it took a whole book to explain it, right? It's not easy. So this alternative is Office 365 as a platform. So we're just using not just SharePoint, but all of the Office 365 properties and for their services, and we're bringing it, building our own UI. So it's a flip of 180 degrees. Instead of SharePoint UI, we bring business data in. We're going to write a business app and bring SharePoint data in. We still get, yeah, go ahead.
Well, the other thing that I think is compelling about that is I always think about the developer community in sort of two distinct camps, right? One are traditional SharePoint developers that haven't done cloud development, and another is the group of cloud developers that have stayed away from SharePoint because they felt it required specialized knowledge.
Yeah.
So what happens in this second idea with Office 365 as a platform is you have the coming together of those two groups. So traditional SharePoint developers can take their SharePoint knowledge and learn some new cloud skills, and cloud people can bring their cloud skills and learn a little bit about SharePoint, meet in the middle, and have a lot more success and a lot more resources available to create these solutions.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the other thing is, how many times have you been asked to build an application, and they go on about requirements and what they want it to do, and then there's always the same sentence at the end. Oh, and by the way, it can't look like SharePoint. Make sure whatever you do, it doesn't look like SharePoint, right?
Ever since 2001, I think.
Yeah, and there's different reasons for that. It's not that the SharePoint UI is bad. It's just that people want something unique, or they want something that's just more tailored to their situation.
Right.
Maybe it's more responsive. And so this new approach of Office 365 as a platform gives us all that, right? It leverages the skills of the cloud folks and the more mainstream developers. I've had developers tell me they don't want to work on SharePoint, and I have to, if we're taking this new approach, hey, you don't have to kind of get involved in, writing to the page model and all that stuff. You can use all modern technologies, and here's this amazing set of APIs you can use. And it's really a game changer. So that's really the approach.
All right, sounds great. Are we going to get to take a look at a sample?
Yeah, sure. One more slide first. I'm just going to show the architecture of the sample. So this is a contracts. Well, it's kind of a customer management solution, I guess. And so the dark gray boxes are the code that I wrote. So there's an MVC app that hosts it. with a web API gateway. We'll dig into some of that code and some of the reasoning behind that. But most of the logic is written in Angular, running on the client side, running in JavaScript. So then from there, we're calling, we have single sign-on experience across Office 365 and this application. We're accessing information from a few of Office 365's different services. And then there's also some hooks into line of business systems and cloud-based microservices that we can bring in through that web API gateway. So let's just go ahead and take a look at this in action. Hopefully you can see my screen here.
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay. So typically I might start my day going to Office 365, and you know, here I am in my calendar, right? And you'll see here that I'm speaking at IT Dev, Unity Developer Pulse, and then after this I have to run off to a couple of customer meetings, right? I've got one here at Great Lakes Food Market and one with Consolidated Holdings, and so, you know, this is probably pretty familiar to everyone. At this point, what am I going to do? I'm not really ready for these meetings, right? I've got to go figure out where the customers are. I need to go to my line of business system, maybe a CRM system, and pull up some background information. And then I also need to get at the contracts that I have and the outstanding documents that I have with these clients. And so you can imagine that that would be in SharePoint. Now, because it's in SharePoint, I can apply all of the good things that you get with SharePoint. I can have retention schedules, policies, rights management, Office web applications, workflows, versioning, approvals. You know, the list goes on and on, right? It's quite a rich ECM platform. And they give me this awesome thing here where if I'm getting ready for the Consolidated Holdings meeting, I can filter it like that. But the problem is I'm still running around from place to place. I might be sitting in the same chair, but I'm opening up 2, 3, 4, or 5 different applications to get my job done, and then trying to collate all that information. So this is an example where maybe my productivity could be better if I had something that was more tailor-made and a little bit more streamlined. So here's the sample application. First thing to notice is that I did not have to log in. So it was a complete single sign-on experience, and you can see here that it's actually gone into my calendar and pulled out just the customer meetings, and it's also got some documents for me. So these are recommended from Office Graph, and we're going to look at the code if we have, assuming we have time, behind all these. It'd be nice to at least look at how all these different calls work. But I'm basically just going to the graph here and saying, hey, just give me something that's useful for this user. I don't have a very fancy login message, but this shows that I'm logged in under the Bob G account, and I could certainly pull in my full name or something. What happens is if I'm getting ready for this first appointment, I just click on it, and there's everything I need. So I've got a map showing me where it is that's coming from the cloud. I've got the customer details coming from my line of business system, which happens to be the Northwind database. I've got the contracts already filtered, and I can even click on these and get to the Office web app. And you know, so that is something that would be very hard to do in a completely custom solution. Integrating Office web apps requires you to code the WOPI protocol and the FSS HTTP protocol, and it's not for the faint of heart. So, you know, I'm kind of getting all that for free, right? And obviously, I can just toggle to the other appointment, and I get all the information from that. So, you know, it's pretty simple. I'm not ready to release the code yet. I've got some more cleanup to do, but my intention is to publish this, and so I'm trying to make it, you know, complex enough to be interesting, but simple enough that the intent doesn't get lost in a bunch of business logic.
Sure, right. Well, I mean, I think it's great even to see it at this conceptual level. You're bringing together data from a bunch of different places into a cohesive whole that helps somebody really accomplish a business need.
Exactly, and I tried to be representative in getting some information from Office 365, which arguably is where a huge amount of a wealth of information lives, but also from line of business, also from public cloud service, right? The other thing is maybe I don't have time to prep at all. Maybe I'm in the waiting room waiting for the customer to come down and sign me into their security desk, and I have 2 minutes to review the situation, right? Well, fortunately, this app works just as well on my phone as it does on any other computer. So I'll simulate that by making my browser narrow. Notice that the menu at the top is now folded itself into a little drop-down hamburger menu, and the customer details, I got rid of the labels, I got rid of some of the detail on the contracts, but I still have the links there that I need. So everything has just kind of rearranged itself onto the screen. I'm not a big expert in responsive design, but it was pretty easy to put this together and to make it usable in on different screen sizes. So, as I expand it, I get more and less information on the screen.
Yeah, it looks great.
So I thought maybe what we do is just kind of spend however much time we have going through some of the different concepts and ideas behind this demo and kind of dissecting it a little bit.
Okay, sounds great.
So probably the first thing would be the single sign-on, right? I mean, that's huge. Sometimes it's what you don't see that's the most important. And now you had Ted Pattison on recently, didn't you, to discuss Active Directory, Azure AD, and all that
episode.
Kind of
stuff. Ted did a bunch of detail on OAuth and OpenID Connect. So yeah, you're right. We went through that stuff in detail. But tell us the approach that you're using on this particular app.
Yeah, well, I'm actually kind of doing double duty on this. So to go back here, I actually kind of have two applications. So if you look at the architecture, right, the Angular app and the MVC app are really two different applications. So the Angular app is actually doing its own authentication to Office 365, and the MVC app is as well. And the MVC app, of course, is serving up the pages and the scripts and everything that are in the Angular app, so that that's where the single sign-on experience comes from. Fortunately, I was able to register just one app and get to it from both APIs, both the .NET API for the MVC app and the Angular, and for my Angular app, which is its own thing.
So you're supporting multiple OAuth flows in that single application definition.
Exactly. Now, would I do that in production? Maybe. Okay, I might or I might not. I think and let's go back to that question, because even though you didn't ask it, but I think it's an interesting question, and part of the reason I'm doing it is because I wanted the benefits of both here, and it's just so easy to do. And I'm kind of taking the attitude here of, you can go back to the discussion from last time's IT Unity Developer Pulse and get the details on how those flows work.
Right. In fact, I should mention to everybody watching that all of these are recorded and they're available up on IT Unity later. So for folks that aren't watching or didn't see the one that we did with Ted, they can certainly go back and view any of those recordings.
Yeah, that's great to know. And so as a result, I don't see the point in going too deep on it. The amazing thing is that I think there's a few high-level concepts that you need to know, and then unless you're troubleshooting, it's great to have the foundation, but you don't really need to know every little detail of it. They've made it easy for us. So I'm now in Azure, and the reason I'm here is because this is where you have to register your app. So even though the application may or may not live in Azure, and certainly Azure is a great place to host it, Office 365 uses Azure Active Directory, and so you have to register the application in order to get the single sign-on and the OAuth support that lets you access content inside of Office 365. You have to register it here. And Ted probably went into more detail, but I'm just going to quickly review it and show you at a high level what I had to do to make this one work, right?
Okay. One of the key concepts that I like to come back to over and over again as we talk about Azure Active Directory and OAuth is that what we're doing is we're making our applications first-class principles, just like people. So our applications have a username, a password, and they have privileges. So we just call the username the client ID, the password the client secret, and then the permissions are set here in the configuration. So I think it helps people, kind of get that idea and have a place to hang it if they think, well, I'm just doing for my application what I've always done for people.
That's exactly right, and in fact, that's why users, groups, applications, domains, they're all right here in the same. That's why they're here. So that's a really good point, Scott. And you'll also notice that Microsoft has already supplied a bunch of these. So Intune, Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, Yammer, the management, like all these things are actually applications that Microsoft has put into the directory for us. So the one that I added was this Doc Center 365 application. And if I go into here, what you'll see is a few different things. You'll see kind of where's my application. I've still got the debugger URL in here. And then these different permission grants. So these are the permissions that I'm going to give the application. It's easier to see if I go over to the configuration section here. Bunch of things you'll see here. I've obviously got a name. Oh, I probably didn't really point it out, but because we're all nice and interactive here, I can do this. When I was going to go to my application, I actually had the launch bar. So I think I used a favorite and forgot to point out that it's actually here on my launch bar.
Right.
Now, unfortunately, unless you know of a trick that I don't, Scott, they haven't yet given us the ability to put this this Office 365 launch bar into our custom applications.
Oh, no, they have.
They have? Is that in the UI
Yes,
fabric?
In fact, it's almost like a planted question there, because Dave Feldman just wrote an article for IT Unity on how to do exactly that.
Well, guess what the next version of my app's going to be?
That's right. So you got to get that up there. Check out the Dave Feldman article. I think it was just published last week.
Oh, thanks. That's perfect. Perfect synergy there. So yeah. So anyway, the logo for that comes from right in here, and then application is multi-tenant. This is kind of interesting. So if I'm using this inside my company, I'd say no. But if I wanted to make it multi-tenant, if I want to kind of be a software supplier for many companies, I can do that. Then I've got my client ID. User assignment would allow me to just publish this app to certain users. So I'm not doing that, but I could. Keys, this is where we get the client secrets from, and what's kind of nice about this is that you can actually have multiple keys that are active, and you can overlap them. So your application has to know what key to ask for when it's connecting, and so what you could do is ask for a 2-year key, and then after 1 year you could introduce a new key and push out an update to your application so that you have uninterrupted service, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then some other little details, but this is kind of the interesting thing, right? These are my permissions to other applications. And there's two kinds of permissions in here. There's delegated permissions, which means that I'm actually going to run on behalf of the user. But my user might be the CEO of the company, might have access to all kinds of stuff that I don't want the application to get to. So I can be very granular about this and say exactly what can the application do on the user's behalf. So maybe I can read contacts and calendars and mail. I don't really need all these for my application, but I was experimenting with them during development. SharePoint Online, you kind of want these to be more granular than they are, right? Like I'd really like to be able to read and write a particular site collection, but I get all site collections as my option. And then AD itself, and there's lots of other applications I could add in here, such as Yammer, Power BI, so I could get into all of that. And then
we expect that list of applications to continue to grow. I think that's another important thing I like to point out to everyone is that if you're sort of watching us for the first time or you haven't done a lot of this, it can feel like we're showing you some kind of alternative way to develop in the Microsoft world, but the truth is what you're doing here is what it means to be a developer in the Microsoft space. This is what everyone's going to be doing going forward.
That's exactly right. The other thing to point out here is that there are these application permissions, which are different than the delegated ones. And this would allow me to do stuff that the end user really isn't able to do. So if I really want to elevate my permissions, this would be the way to do it.
Right.
And by the way, all the junk phone calls in the world are coming to me right now because they know I'm doing a webcast from the next room. So, I'm not going to be able to do those because of something called implicit flow. So one of the things that you have to do a little bit more manually here is you have to, if you want to use the Angular version of this, Angular is running in the client side, and it uses a simpler OAuth flow. And so in order to allow that to work, you have to enable something called implicit flow. And in order to do that, it's really easy. You just download this little JSON file. This will be false by default. I set it to true. You set it to true, you upload it again. That's simple enough. I think you want to be aware of the security implications of doing that. And they will not allow you to run with application kind of elevating permissions if you turn on the implicit flow because of those security concerns. I don't think they're huge concerns. They don't make me want to not use implicit flow very often. But I think that, and you may have more thoughts on this, Scott, but I have two reasons that I can think of. One is that where the whole OAuth exchange, the whole authentication is in the web browser, I'm actually, I have to, I'm not really dealing with the client secret. There's no secure way to get that client secret down to the client. So it's possible that somebody who could hack DNS and appear to be coming from the same place as me could actually appear to be my application. And secondly, I'm handling it in the browser. Maybe somebody puts out a plug-in for the browser that goes in and gets my access token and starts doing other stuff. And so I think both of those are pretty pathological cases, but if you really want to be ultra secure or if you want to elevate privileges, then you probably aren't going to end up using the Angular version of the Active Directory library.
Yeah, well, the challenge with OAuth in general is that it relies very, very heavily on correctly configured SSL.
That's right.
If someone gets your token, they are you for the life of that token. Now, the access token is short-lived, typically measured in hours, and the refresh token requires the key in order to get an access token. So there are layers of security there, but the weak spot is really incorrectly configured SSL. I feel comfortable that if SSL is functioning correctly, that you're safe enough with implicit flow.
Well, it's good to know that you feel comfortable with it. I agree with you, and I think that, and I've heard you say this before too, right? It's important just repeating that the tokens that are passed around are bearer tokens, meaning that they're like dollar bills, that you could spend them anywhere. You don't have to sign the back of the check or something in order to use them. And so if you don't have that encryption there, anybody who intercepts the message, whether it's on your machine or on the wire, they could go in and do things as if they were you.
Right, and
always got to be careful of that.
I'll avoid going into a long-winded discussion of SSL in general, but just, I like people to think for a moment about what they're doing with their applications. Everybody says, oh, we don't need SSL. Everything we're doing is inside the firewall. And then I ask them, are you really comfortable sending around social security numbers in plain text, right? There's no one at your organization that could ever want those social security numbers. So, my basic guidance is this modern development really requires you to be running on SSL.
Yeah. And some of the browsers are starting to have SSL only as a setting. I mean, most security hacks happen from inside of organizations. So we all look around and smile at our colleagues and think, oh, but they're all such nice people. But, the statistics don't lie, right? There's people out there who are inside the organization, so you also have to protect from. So just to quickly show some code here. So this is the little piece of Angular that is going to configure me for ADAL as the Active Directory authentication library. I think
Right?
this is fabulously clever. What they're doing is, if you've ever written Angular code, there's a service called $HTTP that you use to access web services.
Yep.
What this is going to do is it's going to take my HTTP object and put a little shim in there and say, well, if I'm going to these endpoints, and these are the two endpoints that I'm using, then apply the OAuth security to that. And then I don't need to worry about it anymore. I'm done. I'm writing code just like any other Angular application to access those services.
Yep.
And then I do have to init this with my tenant and my client ID, and I have to decide where the cache is. So, if you were to go and get an access token every time you wanted to send a message to Office 365, it would be horrendously slow. So on the client, we cache them in local storage, and on the server, we cache them in a small database. And the reason for that is because we probably are going to have more than one server in a load balance configuration. You're going to want to cache across all the servers, and so a database is a logical approach to that. If I go into my web.config, you can see that I'm in the wrong web.config. You can see that I've got the same thing, but here I've got my client secret. Don't tell anybody what it is. I'll have to change it later, right? But this is where I'm declaring the pieces that are necessary to make this work. And here's my connection to the little database that does the token caching for me.
Right. So this is something you and I are really familiar with, but let's just pause for just a second and make sure we're clear, right? So you have two different OAuth flows going on.
That's
One
right.
is the implicit flow that you're using from JavaScript, and you're using Angular and the ADL provider to intercept the calls that you make and attach the OAuth token.
Mm-hmm.
What you're showing us in the web.config is the more formal OAuth flow that actually uses the client secret, and this is appropriate because your Web API gateway, which we haven't talked about much, but I'm sure we'll get to shortly, actually has server-side code, and therefore it can hide the client secret. That's the real key. Can you defend the client secret? Server-side code can defend the client secret. Client-side code cannot.
That's exactly right. And in addition to what you said, I'm also using the OAuth token to authenticate people to use, or to authorize people to use my application. And
Okay.
right, and that's really easy, right? All I have to do is decorate my action methods with, or my APIs with the authorize. Here I've got the whole controller set up. Attribute, and then again the framework takes care of all that. So I have some links at the end. I'll leave some of this for the end, which lead you through. Microsoft's done a nice job of putting together tutorials that lead you through this process on ASP.NET MVC and on AngularJS, as well as iOS and Android. And so those are quite good, and I'm confident that if you just start with those and walk through it, you'll actually get to the point where we are now without any major hassles, probably.
That's a pretty high bar.
That's a pretty, I don't know, I think, I was a little surprised at how easy it was, okay?
We'll be providing Bob's email if you do have hassles.
If you do have hassles, there you go. Okay, so that was the little discussion of Azure AD and ADL. I forgot the slide, but you can also see here that I've got a list of all the different runtimes that they support. So it's pretty amazing, actually, that they have all of that. So let's just look quickly at responsive design. Now, I'm not a guru of this, and certainly there's designers out there who work with this all the time. But the idea is that you can't really depend on any particular screen size, and you have a really wide range from a huge 4K monitor down to a phone that you want to support. Best practice is to design it for the phone, and the reason for that is that if you design it for the phone and then scale it up, you won't lose any. You'll make sure that it's usable on the phone. If you start designing it on a big screen and then shrink it down, you might cut out something that was essential to the user without realizing it. So I'm using a combination of Bootstrap and UI Fabric. I'll eventually move over completely to UI Fabric on this. But just to kind of give you an idea, for instance, here's the contracts HTML insert. And you can see here that I've got, just look at the classes, right? So I've got panel, these are all Bootstrap classes. The little panel, the little decoration around the contracts, right? I'll show you, I'll remind you what that looked like.
Yep.
Down here, right? That's coming from that panel. And then these fancy classes here are what make the different columns disappear or show at different widths depending on the size of my screen. So Bootstrap has a 12 column grid that it uses, and then it defines extra small, small, medium, and large screen sizes. And so what this is basically saying is, hey, if the title field right here, if I'm on an extra small screen, it should take up 12 columns. I'm on a small screen, it should take up 7, medium 6. And then when I get to the author field, if I'm on an extra small or small screen, don't even show it. Don't even give it any space at all. And that's how you get this kind of effect of, oops, wrong screen, of it getting, you know, like all 4 fields are here now, or all 3 fields, but now I've lost the author, and if I shrink it even more, I only get the titles, right? It also knows, it's also smart enough to know how to arrange this grid so that if I go into the overall doc center, that's how this looks. And again, I've just got the 2 side by side. I've got 2 columns defined here, the left and the right. And if it's below a certain size, then it just takes the 12 columns, which means it's going to put them, it's going to stack them up vertically.
Right.
So pretty simple stuff. That would have been fairly complex to do in the native SharePoint UI, and now it just becomes much more straightforward. The other thing is in my appointments HTML, I'm actually starting to use some of the, this is where the calendar entries are showing. I'm actually starting to use some of the Microsoft styles in here. So the reason that this looks a lot like the calendar items look in Outlook is because it is the way the calendar items are rendered in Outlook. The Microsoft has recently open sourced the UI Fabric, which is just, we're all very thankful for this, I think, allows you to actually use the same styles that Microsoft uses in some of its properties and is moving over to. So
right, and in fact, I'll point out to everybody that we also just put an article up on IT Unity about the UI Fabric as well. So if they want to learn some more, we've got some new content on that as well.
Oh, awesome! Thanks. So now the next thing that I understand we've got only about 15 minutes left, so I want to take a good pace here. The next thing is really this API gateway. And I have 5 reasons why I think this API gateway is a good thing. And then I guess maybe I'll just list them off and then invite you to see if you think of any more or if you agree with them, Scott. The first is that, so the idea here is, right, instead of just calling from Angular directly into my line of business or my microservices, I'm going through this gateway. So you could say, well, it's an extra hop. Why are you doing that? It's a waste of time, and maybe you'd be right, but I have my 5 reasons. One is it avoids cross-domain browser issues. So there's this whole rule that says if you're at a web page on food.com, you can't go and start talking to RESTful services on bar.com unless you make some special accommodation for that. When you call the Office 365 APIs, they take care of that for you using something called CORS, which is the Cross-Origin Resource Sharing Convention and policies that you can set up. But it can be a hassle, and it's just easier sometimes. Essentially, the API gateway is acting as a proxy that's making those issues go away. The second reason is a lot of times these line of business systems are on-prem, and so you probably don't want to just expose the whole line of business system to the cloud, to the internet. But your mobile users want to get in; they want to get this information, and so rather than have like a VPN or a firewall opening, for every line of business system or for every mobile phone, this kind of simplifies it. I could put this solution in Azure, put a VPN between the Azure application and my on-premises line of business system, and then I'm done. I don't need to like open up that whole application to the internet. It also allows me to hide the details of that line of business system. This is my third reason. And in fact, it might actually only expose a subset of it. So I might not have my most sensitive data out there internet facing using this kind of security and everything. So I can select only the parts of the line of business system that are relevant to me. Fourth reason is it allows me to use a service account. So I find a lot of the time you don't really want to thread the user's identity all the way through to the line of business system, especially if you want to maybe make that system available to people who don't have a login, or if you want to use connection pooling and be more efficient by keeping connections open. You can't do that if every user needs their own connection with their own identity. And the final reason is because of caching. So there's a good chance that as I move around in this little application, I'm going to ask for that same data over and over again. And why should I go back and bug the line of business system every single time? Do you have any thoughts on that, Scott?
Well, it's interesting because my first thought is before ADL.js was introduced, this was how we were building all the applications, because in order to create a single page application,
you had to, yeah.
You need the RESTful service behind it. But if you don't have ADL.js, your only choice is to talk to one that's in the same domain and then let that thing do the cross-domain calls.
That's
so
right.
I've built several of these, mostly out of necessity rather than convenience, and then moved over to a lot of the things working with ADL.js recently. So I've done them both, and I think all of your ideas are perfectly legit. I put a big asterisk in my mind next to the idea that you can limit what's exposed from your system. I think that's a real big plus. There could be a full set of APIs on your line of business system, but you're only going to expose certain ones. Gives you a way to make sure that damage is limited if any of that stuff becomes compromised. And then also, I think it's really, if you're really concerned about security, it's much more secure for the tokens as well, because saving the tokens on the server side just makes me feel a lot better than having to deal with them inside the browser.
No, I agree. So I think to kind of feed into your point, Scott, this pattern is still available for Office 365. Like I could put the red Office 365 box underneath of my API gateway. It would be a little bit more code, but I would get those advantages that you mentioned, with also the ability to elevate privileges and run under the application's identity. Maybe I want to actually, look at somebody else's calendar to see if they're available to meet with me. Well, I can't do that unless I have permission. So maybe I want to elevate permission and get it that way.
Right. So I think there's still a lot. There's a use for both patterns. Both patterns are viable, but like everything we do as developers, it's important to consider what the different patterns are and technologies you have available, and how, which one of those best fits your needs.
Exactly. So I'm going to show this. You can just laugh because it's so simple. Again, I was trying to kind of keep this simple, but this is the code that gets back that customer information. Sure. So this thing here, these customer details here, right? And I thought about writing something custom, and then I was like, you know what? I could just grab the Northwind service right off the internet. So, substitute your real line of business system here, right? But basically, I'm just going in and getting the customer data out of there. But to the point of the pattern, that web service that OData service would allow me to do 100 other things with the Northwind database, and all I'm exposing is a subset of the customer attributes that I want to expose. Eventually I'll have the code out there, but there's a little bit of caching in here too. So I'm actually going to cache this based on the customer, so that I don't have to go back each time and get a new, and repeatedly get the customer information from my line of business service.
Right.
So kind of the next thing to think about is the Office 365 APIs themselves. And this is one that is probably out of date because it's almost a day old now. And I feel like new ones come out every day. But so there's the Office 365 Unified API, which is still in preview, which is going to give us a single endpoint to get at all these different features. But you don't have to wait for that. There's already an extensive set of APIs for everything in Exchange or Outlook, SharePoint, files, video, and management, and this just keeps growing. So, Satya Nadella has been famously quoted as saying that this is the most important or most strategic developer surface area in Microsoft. And that means they're making huge investments in exposing this information for you and me to build cool applications like this. So I thought I'd just show a couple of examples from this demo. So for instance, the appointments are coming in here to the top of the UI. What I wanted to do was get all of today's appointments. So I took today's date and then I computed the end of today, and I had to format these for use in an OData request, which was kind of interesting. And then it's as simple as just $HTTP get, and here's the URL. I'm just going to say, give me my calendar view, start time equals, end time equals, and that's it. And when this comes back, this promise is going to fire, and this function will get called, and I'll have my data right there. I don't have to deal with security because adel.js is doing that for me under the covers.
That's right. It intercepts the call and attaches the token for you.
Yeah, and these APIs are, well, if you configure them out, because they're not as well documented as I would like, but if you configure them out, they're super powerful. Let me show the contracts one quickly. This is, now here I'm pulling data out of SharePoint, and this should look familiar if you've written like a SharePoint hosted app before, or even a provider hosted app and you chose to use the RESTful API. It's the same call. API web lists, get the list by title, give me the items, and then I'm doing, these are the columns I want. A little fun here on getting the author name. You actually have to do a join because the users are stored in a separate list in the site collection.
Right.
Here's the where part of the query where I'm saying I only want the things for this particular customer. Then I'm going to order it by the name of the contract. And again, when this comes back, I've got the data right in my hand, and I can just go ahead and start populating out that list of items that I'm going to get bound into my UI. So the last thing that I wanted to kind of highlight here in our last few minutes is the Office Graph. And really the Office Graph, the intention of it from a business point of view is Microsoft recognized that people work in all these different applications. They work in Outlook, they work in SharePoint, they work in the other Office client applications, they work in Yammer. And you know what? Each one of those was purpose-built for a certain type of communication, Skype for Business as well. So people don't want one giant UI to rule them all because it wouldn't be practical, but they also want some way of connecting all that information. And so that's really where the Office Graph comes in that it captures signals. So whenever you edit a document, send an email, participate in a Skype call, identify somebody as your colleague, it's actually, oops, I missed a slide. I guess I cut out the slide. It's actually combining all that stuff together for you into a graph, a data structures type graph, and then you can start traversing that. So it's really pretty easy to make these calls. You use the SharePoint search API to do it. So this all kind of is driven by the search engine. You put in your normal query, and then you also put a separate graph query where you're saying, in this case, I'm saying, well, I want things that relate to me that are trending for me. And so these are some or all of the available action types that, if I want to see everything I've modified or everybody who I'm a colleague with or my managers, things like that, I can pull all that information in from the Office Graph. So if we were to take a look at that code. It's really simple. I just have to find it. Here it is. Right, I decided I wanted Office documents only. So I'm going and making the search part of my query is just things that are Office documents. You can see how that would work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the graph part of my query is just saying things that were relevant to me. And these are the properties that I needed to show. And that's it. So now all that machine learning goodness is going on in the background, and I don't need to concern myself with it.
What I love about this is the same code that we've been showing for a few years, just teaching people how to call the RESTful API for search.
That's
and
right.
You're just adding a little bit extra to it. But what's powerful about it, and it's kind of easy to miss, especially because you've limited the demo to documents,
Mm-hmm.
You're searching more than just SharePoint.
That's right.
You can come back with emails from this search, that type of thing. So it's very powerful because it's looking across all the different pieces of Office 365 for things that are relevant to you and bringing them back using the same syntax that we previously used just to search SharePoint. So it's a very significant advancement.
Absolutely. I'm pretty excited about it and looking forward to seeing what else they kind of add to this, because I'm sure it'll continue to evolve. Machine learning is a very hot area right now, and there's all these, a lot of people are tooling up on it. The nice thing about this is you don't have to be a machine learning expert to make these queries and to get all the benefits, because Microsoft has done kind of the heavy lifting for us. So I think we're probably almost at time. I'll let you kind of put a bow on it if you want, Scott. But just basically, here's some resources that I had. Feel for your screen shooting pleasure, or I guess can these get posted somewhere on the site?
Yeah. Well, of course the recording for this will be posted, but we can also make the resources available on the landing page for that as well.
That's great. So yeah, we've got my article on this same topic, the SharePoint as a Service article that was discussed earlier, the authentication kind of overview, and the getting started tech tutorials, as well as the Office UI Fabric. I'm sure there's probably some other good stuff up on IT Unity that we could add to that list.
Yeah, we talked about a couple of the articles that are up there right now. So great. Okay, well, thanks, Bob. We really appreciate you spending an hour with us talking about these NextGen portals. I think what we've laid out here hopefully give everyone a nice overview of all the pieces that are involved. Obviously, there's a lot more that everybody can and should be doing on their own to dig a little bit deeper, but this is certainly a great roadmap. So thanks for coming.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it.
You bet. And thanks to everybody who watched for spending an hour with us. We really appreciate your time. And thanks to Microsoft, as always, for being our sponsor. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody next time. Thanks again, Bob.
Great, thanks.